Hey everyone, Ayana here from Am.A-line Collections. I have two creative minds who are also influencers joining us tonight. We have Ciara from the New Mix, and we have David from the Threadability. And we also have Chris from Chrisburnstyle with us. Thanks for joining, everybody. So tonight we're just going to have a conversation about social injustice, but also what you all have been doing creatively during quarantine, see how you're doing, and just get your spin on what we all can do within the fashion industry and across our country. So Ciara, you can take it away.
Okay. So what I've been doing creatively during quarantine, really lots of photo shoots like in the house. TikTok probably took off pretty big, I want to say, around quarantine. So a lot of creative ideas and a lot of creators were on TikTok. I did a newspaper thing. I did, a toilet paper thing. So just trying to stay active and not be bored with, being a couch potato, really. But as far as social injustice, I have always been an advocate for it. I grew up in the good old South. So I've always known, obviously, about social injustice and things like that, and trying to be active in the community. And luckily, I've had friends like David, reach out and ask, what can he do? How can he keep up? This and that. And it's been really good, I feel like, so far. David.
I hope so.
Yeah, I feel the same. David asked me this thing. He was like, "Hey, you're okay?" I was like, "Yeah." "Hey, I saw your post. I'm gonna reach out to you. I have an idea." And he was like, "I'm game."
Yeah, that was awesome.
So, David, what about you? What's been going on in Denver?
Personally, creatively, I've been at the start, I was definitely doing a lot of apartment shooting, trying to stay creative indoors. I'm starting to kind of venture out a little bit. But yeah, I think I've been personally refocusing creatively to kind of remove myself from the center of my page, which is kind of a weird thing to do, but try to formulate a message that's more helpful and centers audience. So that's kind of what my goal is. I'm still working through that. Social injustice wise, I feel like throughout my life, I feel like I don't even know what the right way to say this is, but I would like to say that I've been an advocate for it, but I think in the last month or so, it was eye-opening to me that I was clearly not doing enough, or just personally just probably staying more quiet than I should. So that's kind of been a big realization, and so now opening my eyes and learning a lot, I've realized that there's a lot that I have not been taught. So again, thanks to Ciara for teaching me quite a bit and being open to all my questions, which she doesn't have to be, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad you all have a great relationship as well. Relationships are key to this whole thing, not just injustice and battling that, but quarantine itself.
Yeah, for real.
What about you, Chris?
So I started quarantine with the idea that I was really gonna be at home and creating content. And initially I was kind of hard on myself because I was in such a rut with myself that I couldn't motivate myself to do things. So then and David actually talked about this a lot of times of it's like almost like self-flagellation. Like I talk down to myself, like, why didn't you do this? Why aren't you doing this? And kind of had to refocus on things that I actually was passionate about. And actually it came at the time when a lot of the calls for social justice with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and that hit home particularly for me because I live in Louisville and this stuff is going on literally down the street from my house. There were protests. So I felt more than obligated to, like David said, to do more. And so that's actually where kind of the two things we're talking about, where content strategization for me, as well as being an advocate for the movement, kind of melded together, because I started having these, kind of what we're doing now, which is these open conversations, particularly with people of color that I consider friends, and I also consider to be very great voices that needed to be heard. And so like David, it was more about, okay, I need to do something. What am I good at? How can I use my gifts that I have? And for me, it's just, I love talking to people. I love listening to people and getting their experiences. So then I was like, okay, I can use my platform that I've built over the last couple of years and use that to then hopefully, particularly for white guys, white men especially, because I feel like guys in general don't talk and don't verbalize a lot of things all the time. And then on top of that, white people are afraid to talk about, and then also like afraid to jump out of their comfort zone on these things. So my goal was like, okay, if I show that I can let my guard down and I'm willing to listen and learn and say like, hey, you know, I need help. Like I want to do something, but I need help to do it. That was when all of a sudden I started doing more things centered on social justice on my actual page, which I've actually loved. I've loved every experience with it. So it's funny how, you know, even within all this, we're finding ways to stay creative and stay engaged and stay connected. Even as we're physically separated, then obviously you have so many divisions popping up. But it's been fun. It's been very eye-opening for me, and I've really enjoyed listening and learning thus far.
I actually watched one of your videos and I was like, hats off. That was really good. I mean, like I said, you know, David mentioned you were doing this already. And I was like, yeah, when I had the idea, I said, you know, I have to do something. You know, I'm a Black woman in America. I own my business. Like, if I don't speak out about my own experiences, what are we doing?
Correct. And I kind of felt the same way. It's like, my best friend in the world is Black. I've grown up, I was raised by a Black woman essentially, who was my primary caregiver when I was younger. And, you know, just things culturally, you're like, how can I sit here and like listen to rap music and enjoy like Black culture and then not also stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, we need to be protecting, we need to be fighting for that too. So it was that obligation of like, man, we have to do something. We just have to. There's no way around it.
Right. So for myself and for you, Chris and Ciara, we all have grown up in relatively southern areas of the country. So going off of that, I actually was born and raised in one of the places that the Civil War was mainly based, Manassas, Virginia. And there's a lot of history there. So there's been a lot going on, you know, protests and everything. We're right next to Alexandria and DC, where, you know, statues have been coming down. So I just wanted to see what your take was on what has been going on, if there's anything in your area that's similar. Ciara.
So like I'm in Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach, we've had a lot of protests, but Virginia Beach doesn't have like any of the Confederate statues or things like that. But in Richmond, I believe they're taking it down, or they did take it down. And I love it. You know, growing up in the South, Chattanooga, Tennessee, right on the border of where the Civil War was fought, you know, in Fort Overthrow, Georgia. I grew up, you know, on land that was owned by slave owners and things like that. So it kind of hit home with all these Confederate things, because I've grown up with it. I've seen it. You know, you see it everywhere in the South. And people wear belt buckles, hats, anything, you name it, they have it on there. So I think it's just a very good time for everybody to realize what that actually means and dig into the history of the Confederacy and the Confederate flag and things like that. But yeah, in Virginia Beach, we've had a lot of protests, a lot of talks with, you know, our senators and things like that. But I'm glad that we don't have any statues here, so they haven't really taken anything down. But in Richmond, I believe they did. So,
Chris.
So it's interesting if we're talking about Confederate monuments and statues. So, like I mentioned previously, Louisville has been, if not besides Minneapolis, if not the focal point of the current movement, has been one of. And it's been really hard because I love this city. I've grown up here my entire life. I live very close to my parents, and it's hard when you have a city that's fighting for its own kind of existentialism in its own way. You know, we have a very diverse community, and where I live is a little bit more separated from, say, downtown, where a lot of the protests have been taking place. But even in this relatively quiet suburb, like I said, like my fiance and I went to a protest down the street where we had probably a couple hundred people out supporting, and it was beautiful. So there's the really proud side I have of it. I'm proud of my people, of the city, but then there's the leadership side of it, where our mayor has been absolutely awful. The LMPD, Louisville Metro Police Department, has been absolutely awful with all this. And simultaneously, if we're talking about Confederate monuments, when I went to the University of Louisville, and I was taking a class actually called History of the New South, which was everything from post-Civil War up until today. So we spent an entire 2 weeks talking, and this was in 2016, talking about Confederate monuments and what they mean. So when Ciara says something like, people need to understand what type of emotion that causes people, seeing, and like plenty of people in the South, like you said, wear hats and belt buckles and put on the back of their car as a cultural sign, where you're like, dude, you don't understand what this represents to people. So at the same time we were having this very open discussion in my class, there was a Confederate War monument that was literally in the center of campus. And Louisville, Kentucky was a state in the Union, and Louisville was a pretty progressive city even back then. So we were all, as students, kind of like, wait, why is this on campus? And then you learn the history of why they were there, that they were put there not even for the Civil War. They were put there for around the time that the Ku Klux Klan was actually rising to power in the country. So it's like, when you start actually reading the history of it, you say, this is stupid, it shouldn't be here. So I remember walking back from that class to my apartment, and they were taking down the statue that day. And it was just this really surreal moment of like real world knowledge that you're getting in class and it actually applying to something that was happening. So I would love to see every Confederate memorial taken down. There's no reason it should be. There's no reason it should be on the state flag. There's no reason it should be a Capitol flag. They just recently took down the statue of Jefferson Davis in the state capitol in Kentucky. So there's been progress on it. I think what all of us are looking for, though, is actual justice. And so it's like, great, all these symbolic things are awesome, and we need to change the way we think, but we also need to like arrest the people that killed Breonna Taylor. We also need to actually put in practices that defund the police. You know, there's all these things where it's like, hey, let's actually do things that'll help, instead of just like putting up all these symbolic things that are supposed to just make us happy. So it's been interesting being in the city though right now, I will say.
I bet. So David, what's your reaction, since Denver is a very progressive city, but like
Denver's probably on the more progressive side, but we definitely, Colorado's a big place, so there's definitely more like conservative there's pockets of conservative and progressive areas, I would say. Personally, like, I'm for taking down these monuments, just because I don't know why we would honor that kind of symbol, I guess. And that I'm with Chris on this one. That I think I'm for them coming down, but I'm more for actual change happening. So
definitely.
But yeah, in Denver, there's been some like neighborhood name changes to like petition to do that, because they're named after historically racist figures. So there's definitely been change being pushed for in that, and yeah, definitely I would probably say not to the extent that in southern states that I'm sure have been experiencing, just because, and maybe I'm just ignorant to it, but I don't think we have as many of those kinds of monuments here.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But again, like, I could be, again, that could play up to part of my ignorance, where I haven't paid attention to it, and therefore I haven't like looked for those monuments or seen them, and they haven't meant the same thing to me. So maybe I just haven't noticed before,
But it's interesting though you say they changed neighborhoods, because I don't even think Colorado was a state after the Civil War.
So it's not named after Civil War era figures, but like historical figures in Colorado's history.
Okay.
They've been searching for those names to change. So there's not ones named after, I don't think, like Civil War era
curious
figures, but yeah, they're making change of, I think they're searching back through Colorado's history,
which is always good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have something, Chris?
No, I was just agreeing. Sorry.
Okay. You're okay. Okay, so moving on a little bit, but still within the same realm. So we all have our own style, and we're all trying to share that along with how people can explore their style. So within the fashion industry, there's a lot of divide, and there has been for years. Of course, men still dominate fashion design wise. I design menswear, so there's not a lot of women designing menswear, and I'm a Black woman. So from a fashion industry standpoint, what do you think we should all be doing?
I guess I'll go first since I've been going first. I think from a fashion standpoint, I think Dave and I have talked about this, and another good friend of mine, Steven, just being more proactive and, seeing that, the Black influencers or content creators in the fashion world aren't sometimes given the same as white content creators, male or female. You and I could have the same engagement rate, the same amount of followers, but you're getting paid almost twice as much as I am versus, whatever you received or whatever the campaign is. So I just think being vocal is very big. I've used my platform and been very vocal. I'm thankful that I've had Chris and David, who we've met the last 2 years, a year or so maybe. And I love seeing what they're doing and just using their platform, because if you keep hitting these brands in the face with it, it's never going to go away. And I love that, because brands are like, okay, we have to look at our team, we have to look at, our content, we have to look at, where we're producing and, where our personal standpoints and things like that. Because to be honest with you, my personal standpoints or, values don't coincide with yours. I don't really want to work with you, So I think just being very, very vocal in itself plays a part, and just doing that says a lot.
Right. David?
Yeah, I'm fully on board with that. I've been on a personal standpoint, which I guess is more the, content creator industry as opposed to the fashion industry. It's a part of it, but fashion industry is much bigger, I would say. I like the brands that I work with, I've been asking the question and trying to hold them accountable, and anything new that comes about, I ask if I can suggest some BIPOC creators that that might be relevant for their campaigns. If they've already know these people, what they're doing, what their personal goals are. I'm like, I've been on the phone with Ciara before, and we've checked some of the folks out on LinkedIn to see who's kind of at the head of these companies, just so we can get an idea of, if they're following up with the things that they have been posting on social media, because there's a big accountability thing. I think the issue is in the past is that we come across brands sort of exploiting these minority groups, whether it's like during Pride Month or Black History Month or things like that, where, they have their campaign for that month and then it sort of goes silent, you know what I mean? I've just been checking out to see okay, did they post a black square, and then what have they been doing the rest of the time? And honestly, I've been happy to say that most of the companies that I personally work with have either provided a response or taken some suggestions, which is awesome. But I think there's a big part on my plate to hold the folks that I work with accountable, and then same as Ciara, if our values don't match up, then respectfully move on.
Absolutely. What about you, Chris?
Well, in terms of content creation and fashion on social media, that sort of thing, I will echo, basically retweet both of what they said. I think what Ciara said about using your voice, and then working with brands that have the same values, and then also what David's saying about holding brands accountable and not just being performative. I think that's huge. I'll come at it a different way, because I've worked for the past 6 or 7 years in fashion and retail. The retail industry itself has a lot that needs to be done, from a client service perspective, which is what I did, all the way to the manufacturing itself. There's so much inequality that exists within the industry that hasn't been addressed because it benefits us economically. And that's not just about like Black people. It's about underprivileged communities in general, and underprivileged minorities, particularly when you see most of the workers in these factories are low income, underprivileged, typically either Hispanic or Asian workers, and they're exploited. And there needs to be change from the very foundation of that. And then you can start talking about a lot of the things that I think that are important too, which is marketing, and even just as simple as the fact, like the store that I worked at for a long time, the amount of Black people that I actually served and actually helped was disproportionately. I mean, so many more white people just have the money to shop at a high level and get really nice things, that it's the exception to the rule a lot of times when I would help out a black couple or a Black gentleman in general. So it's like, there's that stigma when people would walk to our store, which was very high end, and if a black couple walks in, it's either they're trying to shoplift and steal, which is terrible. Like the fact that that's even a thing that people just stereotype, or it's, well, they must be an athlete or musician or something like celebrity, where it's like, no, how come they couldn't just be a doctor or a professional who has their own business that worked hard? So it's like, it's also fighting those stereotypes that exist within the retail industry itself. But I think it starts at all levels. And I will say it's encouraging, because I think a lot of what style is now is what people do see on social media. So when creators like Ciara, who is a strong Black woman, go on and start calling out brands, and David, who is someone who is always open and honest with his followers, starts going on and calling out brands, that's where it starts too. So there's so many levels to it, but I love seeing what like these two are doing and so many other people are doing, at least on the marketing front.
Absolutely. I appreciate all of y'all for what you're doing. Definitely following your posts and just seeing the various things that you have to say. All right, so kind of wrapping this up. Last question for you all. I know we've all been in quarantine again. So what, as far as your community, and remember, we all have multiple communities, not just one. What kind of impact would you like to have for your community? We'll start with David.
Okay.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think on online presence wise, I mean, my thing is always, the community that I've built, which obviously each of you is a part of, but we'll the online part of it, I think the impact that I want to have within that is, a lot of what connected us came through style, came through fashion, our love, our love of, dressing and doing that, but so much more for me, and that's how I started, obviously, just building this community by posting outfit of the day pics and things like that. And that's kind of a baseline for it maybe, but what I'm realizing now is the impact I want to have on my community is to create one that's open and we can talk about more things than just clothes, and talk about most of my platform is built right now off developing personal confidence and being super open with the things that I'm struggling with. So while it is about developing confidence, for me it's me in the process of developing that confidence, not talking from a point where I am talking down in a sense of like, oh, look at me, I'm super confident and I have all this stuff to teach you. Whereas like, no, like if you go through what I share, like I have some rough days and probably more rougher ones more recently than better ones. So I guess if anything, the impact I want to make on a community online is that I'm someone who's a normal individual just kind of sharing experience, and that I can be I can be a friend even though we've never met in person. And I really just want to build some positivity in that. As far as my real life community here, I'm trying to figure out how to make an impact, with local businesses and with local people in the area. So become, I don't want to say necessarily a public figure, but somebody who can help brands and help people in this community find their narrative and explore, and then build up a strong sense of who they are within this community. So that stuff's kind of separately that I'm working on that I haven't really talked a lot about. But I guess I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but like summarizing it, like I kind of want it to be like a shoulder to lean on virtually and like in the community, and that's kind of my thing. It started from style, and that's where it'll continue to sprout out of, because that's sort of the visual content that I create, and that's how I talk through all of this, and that's my art. But the reason I write such lengthy captions and talk so much is because it's like all I want to do is connect and share something. So really that sense of community for me is having a group of people that not necessarily like-minded, but at least are open enough to share and talk about things that maybe aren't just, this hot new shirt that just came out. While that might be the start of it, I'd love for us to talk about the meaning behind it, So that's kind of where my head's at. I'm rambling, and I probably don't have the best way to make it.
Yeah, where you're coming from.
But that's what it is, I guess.
I like that. Ciara?
I think with me, obviously being a Black woman, just continuing to be a vocal, strong Black woman, and I'm sure you can obviously agree with this, is we have a lot of, how do I want to say this, a lot of, I don't want to say negativities, but a lot of things that go against Black women and that come with being a Black woman, being too headstrong and things like that. But also taking that and putting it into the LGBT side of the community, because, a lot of people say Black Lives Matter and things like that, but they don't necessarily mean the gay, trans, whatever community. So I want to, somewhat, which I am, digging into both of those worlds and making sure people, understand both and how we can be inclusive and together. But yeah, I think that's really pretty much it, just digging in those two communities and honing in on both, because a lot of people don't understand that in the Black community, we have a lot of issues with, gays and transgenders, and it's very, very hard. I had to explain that to my mom. She was like, well, are you going to support more, Black communities and things like that? And I was like, I would love to. I said, but, it's a very, very big connotation with, some Black people don't like gay men, some don't like lesbians, and it's very, very hard truth that I have to live to. I have to not only deal with the Black side, but the gay side, so it's like a double whammy. So kind of just honing in on those communities and trying to figure out like how I can, incorporate the two and bring more light to both. So I think that's kind of where I'm headed with my stuff. So
it's beautiful and very impactful and very important.
More concise too.
That's great. Okay, Dave. All right, Chris.
Well, first, because I love what Ciara said, I've learned a lot more in the last couple weeks, and my sister, who's a human rights attorney in DC, has taught me a lot about this, is that intersectionality and how that comes into play so much. So that's why I appreciate someone like you, Ciara, who is vocal, is strong, is proud, and is saying, you know what, I'm here, and I'm not just dealing with this issue, but also dealing with these issues. So I love that, because I think that experience is so valuable. But in terms of the community, I'll say my approach is twofold right now, at least. One, for fashion, I love menswear, I love style. I think the first thing that people need to address with themselves, like David was talking about with being self-confident, is how you present yourself. And showing guys that dressing nice is not just a form of good manners, but it's a form of self-love. And it's a form of how you feel about yourself. And so if you take the time to curate an image, that's why I always consider myself not a clothing consultant, but an image consultant. It's gonna affect how you carry yourself. I live by the law of you look good, you feel good, you play good. And that exists in every manner, whether it's sports, whether it's the business world, whether it's at home. I think all of us have learned, especially in quarantine, that you can't just get up every day, put sweatpants on, put a t-shirt on, and just go live. Like, you need to dress up and feel good about yourself in order to be impactful. So I'll say that's my main mission in the fashion side. When it comes to the other side that's kind of burgeoning for me, which is just the honest dialogues that we've been having, I personally, particularly right now, want to represent the very privileged white male who has had a lot of things given to him in life, who is now realizing he needs to humble himself and realize that I'm not just complicit in this, I am a part of a system that oppresses people of color, So how can I take that and then use it to make change? And even if it's something as simple as just listening, I think a lot of white people need to understand our voices have been heard for way too long. It's time for us to listen. So my job right now, I feel like, my goal with my community is to show that even someone like me, in this position, like me, we all like to go into little boxes, right? Can do something as simple as just humbling yourself and having compassion and trying to have empathy and hopefully learn something that will benefit all of us. And that part's still developing. And I'm hoping that the more that it develops, the more I find out about myself and hopefully about other people at the same time.
Awesome. I love it. And really, all three of your goals for impacting your community relates exactly to what my brand is about connecting human experience through clothing. We all have a condition, whether it's high or low, and we're all going through things together. So thank you all for sharing that, because that's what we're about. That's what we're supposed to be doing, helping one another build. I greatly appreciate you all again.
So cool.
Sure.
Thank you so much.